Would you lead us in a pledge of allegiance, Don?
I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Didn't put the pen down. Whoa.
You gonna have to carry tonight?
No, they just look forward.
Do I have it?
Toy.
I think I might need one, but I don't ever lean back. So.
Okay, Don, we'll have minutes, please.
Thank you. The regular monthly meeting of the Franklin Town Board was called to order at 7:35 p.m. by Supervisor Jeff Taggart. Present were Garrett Sitz, David Grant, Donnie Smith, Dwight Bruno, Paul Warner, and Mark Lang. The minutes were read from the December 6, 2016 meeting. David Grant made a motion to accept the minutes as read, Dwight Bruno seconded the motion, and all agreed. Mark Jacobs has resigned effective December 29, 2016. David Tuthill reported for the Kellogg Trust that they will be meeting with the new owners of the Kellogg School regarding rent for the space they occupy. Planning Board meeting on Thursday, January 5th, 2017 at 7:30 p.m. regarding the new owners of the school. The Recreation Committee is looking for new members. There will be a meeting on February 6th, 2017 at 7 p.m. There is a new 4-year contract for the highway employees that has been agreed upon. David Grant made a motion to accept the new contract. Dwight Bruno seconded the motion, and all agreed. Jeff thanked Mark Lang for their work on our town roads. The appointments for 2017 were made. Garrett Sitz made a motion to accept the appointments for 2017. Donnie Smith seconded, and all agreed. Bill Van Gorder from NBT Mang Insurance would like to provide insurance for the town. Jeff would like to get a quote from him. We will set up a time for a meeting. Don Hubbard talked about the shared solar program. He wants to know if the town would be in favor of him investigating this option further. The town would be in favor of this project. The concerns of the board include the funding of the project and if the old landfill could be used or not. Tony Brewer thanked Mark for the great job on the roads. Garrett Sitz made a motion to go into executive session regarding an employment issue at 8:25 p.m. David Grant seconded, and all agreed. David Grant made a motion to return from executive session at 9:20. Donnie Smith seconded, and all agreed. Meeting adjourned at 9:20.
Any additions or corrections? Motion?
Accept the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Here. Okay, is there anything from the Kellogg Fund?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Nope,
Okay.
we don't meet again till April.
Okay, Southern Tier Solar Works, you're up.
Thanks. So how are we going to do this without
Well,
people?
I can.
Oh, here goes.
I don't know.
That spot right there is where nobody wants to be. Where you're heading towards.
Better wait till back or no?
Maybe we aim high. Can we get this up a little higher?
Oh, I can keep coming back.
There you go, thanks.
There we go. Let's try this. That's a little too close.
Quite an adventure we're in.
There we go. That's better.
Am I reading it right?
So thanks very much to the board for inviting us to come here, and to Don for setting this up. My name's Adam Flint. I'm from Southern Tier Solar Works of the Binghamton Regional Sustainability Coalition. My colleague Evan Bixby and I are going to try and get through the presentation part real quick so we can get to questions and discussion. Just a little bit about us. Southern Tier Solar Works is the clean energy program of the Binghamton Regional Sustainability Coalition, or BRISC. We're a nonprofit organization, been around for about 8 years. Our current program is funded by NYSERDA. Our focus is largely on solar, as you can hear from the name, but we're actually starting to work more in the commercial space, especially now that in Broome County we have something called property assessed clean energy that makes it easy for commercially owned buildings and nonprofit owned buildings to make energy improvements of all kinds, not just solar. So community shared solar And actually, before I go into this, we did attempt to address most of the questions that were asked of us via Don, but there may be some that will be better covered in the discussion. So community shared solar is a new way of doing solar to New York. Normally with solar, if you're going behind the meter, which means it's not a utility array, it's not a power plant, it's basically either giving someone directly kilowatt hours or it is offsetting their usage. What community shared solar allows is to have a whole bunch of different people involved. Can be residential, commercial, municipal, whatever. Devil is in the details, as you'll find. This is a new thing to New York. About 18 months ago, the Public Service Commission enabled regulation, and I won't disguise from you, it's been challenging. It does allow an economy of scale that's better than individual arrays, particularly for small businesses or for individuals. As a community affair, it increases public understanding of solar energy. We're a little further along with a project we're doing right now in Shenango County in Guilford. And in that case, they came to us and they wanted something that was literally a community solar project that would be focused on Bainbridge, Guilford first and foremost. Regional job generation. It happens there was just a report that came out from the Solar Foundation. If you have time, I can put it up on the screen. 1 out of 50 jobs created last year were in solar. There's now 250,000 people working in solar alone in the United States, 85,000 working in clean energy in New York, about 2,500 working in clean energy in this region. New financing models, that's kind of where we are now. We're testing new financing models for this. And so some of the questions you asked about financing we can answer, others we can't until we know what all this is going to look like. So there's, and actually before I get to shared solar, I should add another thing. Depending on how big we can make this array, and depending on how much of the municipal load you want to address, it may or may not be possible to include other members, right? So this may end up being more of a municipal array, but we'll see. We'll see what we can fit. So if we do shared solar, there's 2 basic ways to do it. The easy way, but the less inclusive way, is the owner-member. Just realize you're filming my back. I'll try and move around.
That's all right.
The owner-member is pretty straightforward. It looks financially very similar to going solar on your property. That is, individuals pay up front for 20 to 25 years of power. They take the tax credits, they take the incentives. They can't take the New York State tax credit because that currently is limited only to generating power on your own site, right? So if you have it on your property, you're taking that power, you can take the 25%. So it's just the federal ITC, the 30%, the investment tax credit, and the NYSERDA per watt incentive. The only way that this really can work out for low and moderate income people is with something called peer financing. And what that amounts to is if people within the community provide very low cost financing for at least part of the project, perhaps all of the project. The second model, which is more complex, is much more inclusive. This is what we're pursuing in Bainbridge, Guilford. It has to be big to do this. And here it's a pay-as-you-go model, which is just what it sounds like. In essence, either way, your NYSEG bill is where you get credited for the amount of power that you are buying. Typically, you want to buy enough to completely wipe out your supply charge and all associated costs. And in this case, really the only barrier that we have currently as far as membership is transients. That is, we're not in a position to be able to sign people up who are going to be constantly coming and going. So it doesn't matter if you're a renter, it doesn't matter if you have poor credit, it more matters that you're going to stick around as far as we know. Right? Obviously, we can't know for sure. So how is the array paid for? This is just giving you some initial details on how to think about this. You have pre-development costs, which amounts to the engineering, initial engineering, interconnection fees, permitting, and with permitting, you're a permitting authority. So you might be able to make it less expensive than if you weren't, right? And of course the EPC, the engineering, procurement, contracting, installation, and so forth is where all the costs come in. As far as incentives, the two I mentioned, there's that per kilowatt hour commercial industrial incentive from NYSERDA. Who here has gone solar in any way, shape, or form? Anybody? Now, so when you did that, you had, if you did it on your property, you had federal and state incentives, if you could take them, the tax credits, and then you had a per watt incentive. So for residential, if you had a 7,000 watt system, back in the day, in 2014, that was 7,000 off. Now we're down to 40 cents, so it's 2,800 off. The C&I incentive's a bit more complex than that, but it comes from the same pot of money, and that incentive essentially comes off the top. As far as how to finance this, there's a number of different ways to do it. What we're doing in Bainbridge Guilford is, I think it's unique. It's what's called a prepaid PPA. But probably the more common thing is a PPA, a power purchase agreement, where an investor, in essence, owns those tax credits, which is where most of the value comes from financially for maybe 5 years. And that is where most of the money for the project would come from. In addition, there would need to be some debt financing. Our partners at Resident Energy and Co-op Power have access to these sources. If you decided to go through us and through them, this would be part of the cooperative. That's good for at least two reasons. One is New York State securities laws become very burdensome if you are not doing that once you get beyond 20 off-takers. The second reason is there could be potentially, there's no guarantee, but there could potentially be some dividends from this, which would be most likely if the costs of electricity otherwise went way up. And all the members of the cooperative, not just here, but in general, would enjoy that surplus. I already talked about the pay-as-you-go. There was a question about fixed price versus other things for this. Fixed price for a PPA is very typical. And where does the municipality get its electricity supply now? Where are you getting it from?
Mostly from NYSEG.
From NYSEG, okay. So you're not getting your power authority supply from, no, all right, so your rates are probably not particularly low. Am I right about
6
that?
cents.
6? Oh, 6 isn't terrible.
6 or something like that, isn't it, Paul? Most of them 6, 6.5 maybe. You know, plus the delivery fee.
Right.
which-
So getting to that question, typically we can't get rid of the delivery fee.
Oh, yeah, right.
I'm saying typically because right now the reason I'm dressed like this is there's a proceeding at the Public Service Commission with the very accessible name of VDER, the Value of Distributed Energy Resources. That's my idea of a joke at being accessible. What it comes down to is there may be changes in the way solar is valued, which could be applied to demand charges, might conceivably do something about that, but I wouldn't bet on it. Typically with your residential system, the only way you start to wipe out your connection fee is if your system was sized a certain size and then you cut back on your usage a lot, so you had enough to cut out some of that fee. Because basically it's prohibited by law to become a power plant, become a generator beyond your own usage. And so once you get beyond your own usage, the value of your solar goes way down to avoided cost. All right, I think that's enough about that. Now I'm going to turn it over to Evan. And Evan is going to talk a little bit about the site and some of the technical aspects. And then we'll talk very briefly about next steps and get to your questions and discussion.
Right. What was it, last week? We, Jeff Taggart, Mark Lang, Don and I, we all went out to this site to give it a quick overview, to look at it, to make sure that it was actually feasible for this project, to make sure there wasn't anything ridiculous going on, it wasn't covered in forest, it wasn't all hilly, and just to make sure it works. And what we found is that it's extremely, extremely good. The big criteria that you need for a successful solar site, the first big one is a three-phase line. So if you look at at your utility poles, some of them have 3 lines on top and some of them have 2 lines on top. The ones with 2 lines on top simply don't have the capacity to support a system of this size, so you need that 3-phase line in order to support that. And this has this, which is excellent. That's very hard to find. The next is an adequate cleared land area. And you can see here, Currently, the municipality is using this as a storage facility. That's where you can see all this stuff here along the road that they're using just to hold pipes and other things like that. And with our proposal, you would still be able to use that space for that purpose. We would want to use this area here, which is a really, really beautiful, clear, south-sloping field. And south sloping is very important because, you know, we're in the northern hemisphere, sun rises in the east, sets in the west, and because we're in the northern hemisphere, it's low in the sky towards the south. So by having it be south sloping, it gives you the maximum amount of exposure for that land area. And you can see it loops up around here, and this area up here is where the old landfill is. This is a capped over landfill. The reason that this doesn't extend all the way to the tree line back there is because the way that this second parcel, the second part, is filled in, it actually drops off quite steeply on the back end there towards the north, and so that would provide shading, and you can't put solar there. But overall, it looks like an excellent, excellent site. Some of the other big considerations that we had that we weren't sure if we were going to be able to address it as we went out here to visit was the meter location, to make sure that the lines from the three-phase line are actually going to make it to the site without having to pay extra fees that NYSEG associates with running extra line. But luckily, the parcel runs all the way to the road right there, so it shouldn't be an issue. But this entire project, this part A here, based on just some preliminary Google mapping with the ruler tool, is about 3.5 acres, which would be around 700 kilowatts. And then that second part is around 2 acres, which would be about 400 kilowatts. And we get this by saying that on an average flat, free of shade site, it is about 1 megawatt per 5 acres. So I know that one of the big issues that the board had mentioned to Don that he then relayed to us is what happens at the end of this 20 to 25 year period when the solar panels aren't producing as much as they used to, because solar panels do depreciate in efficiency at 0.5% per year. So at the end of this 20 to 25 years, they're around 75% efficient. So there are quite a few options of things that you can do. One is you can renew the site, and because they are still producing at around 70 to 75%, they're still producing power, and that's still very valuable, right? But according to this report by IRENA on end-of-life management of solar photovoltaics, there is going to be an enormous market for recycled solar panels. It doesn't currently exist right now simply because these types of large-scale arrays haven't been around long enough for that market to develop, but they expect within the next 15 years that this is going to be absolutely explosive. And you can see here what the relative proportions of the materials in a solar panel are. So they're primarily glass from the surface, and then polymer and plastics, which they use in different housing components on the solar panel and the back of it. And then aluminum for the sides and the actual frame of the panel. And then silicon for the actual solar panel, the actual electrical components itself that produce the power. And then after that, it's copper wiring, other metals that they have in the soldering process and things like that. And then other semiconductors, sealants, and then a little bit of silver. And as you can guess, glass, extremely easily recyclable. Polymer and plastics, also easily recyclable. Aluminum, very valuable, easily recyclable. And they do have processes for getting that silicon out and treating it essentially as e-waste, like your computer is treated. You take it to a special recycling facility and they can reclaim all of those components.
Before we get to the next steps, just a couple of quick things. There was a question about having to run a line down to the village, and basically the way this works is it's running right into the NYSEG three-phase line that was pointed out. and it's offsetting the electricity load of whoever is going to be a member of this thing. So the only people that are actually going to get the electrons directly are the people closest to that array, whoever they are. The other thing to mention in terms of decommissioning, there are basically the way these arrays are mounted now, depending on what happens with the landfill, is that steel posts are driven, pounded into the ground, so there's no concrete. And steel is also a big factor and also recoverable and also valuable. So you're not going to be dealing with concrete, having to dig that out. Everything except for like tiny little trace elements has some value. And the thing that occurred to me, because I haven't heard discussion of this, which doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, there's obviously a lot of people in business in the scrap hauling world right now in New York. As Eben mentioned, there isn't really much of a market yet because there isn't much material to put into it. But if I were like Weitzman, I'd be thinking to the future here. And it sort of happens at both ends. There are going to be things that may not be practical to repurpose right directly back into the solar production stream, although if the Buffalo Solar City plant ever gets off the ground, that might be a thing, right? You might have people essentially disassembling these things, shipping them off to Buffalo, and getting paid for them. Either way, it's an opportunity rather than a liability.
Yes, they are also expecting a secondhand market to emerge because, like I said, the solar panels still produce quite a bit of power. It's just not the peak efficiency that they had when they were brand new. So that's also expected to happen. Our next steps in this project, Don has applied with the help of, I believe, a few board members for a grant with the Department of Environmental Conservation Environmental Justice Office to help fund some of these initial steps, the pre-development costs that Adam mentioned. So these big pre-development costs are business model planning with Co-op Power and us, so that we can actually come up with a financial feasibility model that will get this thing paid for. We also are going to need an engineering study from Tatum Engineering, who is our partner on these CSS projects. Tatum is a certified B Corp, which means that they have a triple bottom line of people, money, and the environment. And Tatum is actually an acronym that stands for Technology as if the Earth Mattered. And they are extreme consummate professionals and have been doing this for a very long time. And then finally, once we have those things together, we will start the NYSEG interconnection request process, where we can find out actually how much they will let us put on their line, and they will tell us how much the grid upgrade costs will be, things like transformers and running the line and those types of other associated costs with dealing with the utility. So, yeah, those are the next big things.
Let's go to your questions. Or your question.
Now, you're working now with Banbridge Guilford?
Yep.
Is that with the town of Guilford or with a?
It is with the town, so it's interesting because it was first the mayor of the village and the landowners that came to us and said, hey, we want to do this thing. And when we first had the meeting, I was fairly discouraging because it was becoming a bit challenging with things going on in Albany. Yeah, that would be a good idea. I'll just turn it off. But we've had some success in a couple of arenas. One is the property and the interconnection turned out to be really sweet. There's no one else on the circuit. The three-phase line is right there. The property is perfect. And we are anticipating some philanthropic money also. The remaining challenge we face is purely financial. And you know, the big costs beyond the pre-development, and the pre-development could probably be covered mostly by that grant, is the EPC, the engineering, procurement, and contracting. And in some ways, that's less of a lift as long as we can get a good per kilowatt cost. And you know, the bottom line for us is we want to be able to save something, preferably 10 to 15%. And most of that is in the price we get for that EPC bid and in the financing. So depending on how cheap we can get the financing for the EPC cost, that drives almost everything.
So I guess you still got maybe you said Bainbridge, Guilford, now, is this in the town of Guilford?
It is in the town of Guilford, although if you were to leave the property and walk across the road, you would be in the town of Bainbridge. So it actually doesn't involve physically the village at all, even
Right.
though the initial, so we've been communicating with George Senek, who's the supervisor there, and he's very supportive. So the permitting authority, I don't think they have a lot of regulations in Guilford, but they're on
So
board.
this is on the county route, not on Route 7, not Bainbridge, it's not the village of Bainbridge, it's the village of Guilford.
It's the town of Guilford.
Town
Town of Guilford, yeah. What's the name of the road again?
It's county route.
It is Cyril's Hill Road,
Yeah.
so it's, yeah, like I said, literally walk across the property. The reason that we got involved with Bainbridge in the first place was because the landowners actually thought that they lived in Bainbridge, because they're that
That's
close.
their
Right.
mailing address, but it is.
Yep. Okay, 'cause we drive by there a couple times now we have. And I see where the Guilford Town sheds, I guess, or must be on that Cyril's Road or whatever.
I don't know.
No, so this is not a municipal project, this is on a private landowner's.
Oh, it is?
property.
Yeah,
Okay.
Right.
yeah,
It's not-
this is a private property.
Okay, okay.
And the stipulation was they really wanted people within Bainbridge Guilford to have first dibs at getting in on membership, people and businesses potentially. And we also want to make sure that at least a quarter of the off-takers are 80% or below of area median income. 60% is people who are on heat energy systems, 60 to 80 is sort of the moderate.
What's the projected cost?
Yeah, so depending on all these factors I mentioned, the total cost would be 1.5 million, give or take. But again, that money is not coming from you. If we go with a pay-as-you-go model, that money is going to come mostly from the PPA tax credit provider. And the other part that I didn't talk about is we do what's called a flip. Most all of the value of the tax credit takes place in 5 or 6 years. So by analogy, when I got a geothermal system, I had enough tax credit so that I paid no federal for year 1, no federal for year 2, and I had just a little bit left over in year 3. This is a much bigger project, and the idea is that the ownership would then flip back to the LLC that was owned by the cooperative in year 6. So the asset would actually be owned by the cooperative for most of the life of the asset.